how do you learn to represent people? How do you learn to become a quasi-attorney and represent the contract and represent the employees?
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
What's your name? Where are you calling from?
It's Mel Sutton. I was calling you touch on a couple of subjects you've been talking about.
Oh, yeah, Mel. Mel is, you are the, not the president of the West Alabama Labor Council, but one of the officers, right?
I'm a region vice president and sit on the West Alabama Labor Council with James Crowder and that group.
Yes, love those folks. Yeah, well thanks for calling in.
Joe Marshall and I are friends, and we critique the show every week whenever we listen in. I didn't get to listen last I was out on vacation, but y'all get a critique. You didn't know it, but you did. We always discuss what y'all talk about on the show and the issues that's going on. No, I just wanted to make a comment on a couple of things. If Adam is listening, you know, I posted the thing about the Built for the People. You were giving out union density information in an update and reporting on union density, and you posed a question yourself as to why the Shoals area had a higher rating or a higher density than a lot of places. Mm-hmm. It goes back to the TVA, the inception of the TVA. And in the Built for the People, it tells the story of how when the TVA was created, that they had no way of training these people. So they brought in all the trades locals because they were going to need massive amounts of people and workers of all kinds of trades. So the government, the TVA, brought the trades locals in to train all these employees. And it just stuck and stayed.
And I have seen, I went back and watched Built for the People, that documentary that you recommended. And just for folks listening on the stream, you'll be able to hear this when it's clipped. Ben is trying to work on getting the sound to actually go on the air. But we've got Mel Sutton on the line here, and he is answering a question that we posed about why the Muscle Shoals union density is so high compared to the rest of the state and compared to the rest of the South. And he said that it was because of the TVA. They brought in a lot of local union or a lot of union locals into the area, and it just kind of stuck. And I heard. I did watch Built for the People, and I really enjoyed it, or I watched at least half of it. And did that talk about some of the union? That talked about some of the union involvement in the TVA, right?
Yes, it touched on, the creation of the TVA, and it tells the entire story of the Tennessee Valley. But if they want to watch it, it's a really good documentary, and you need to watch the long version too. On YouTube, you'll get about an hour version, and there's one that's almost 2 hours. It tells the entire story.
Oh, wow. Where is the one that's 2 hours? Is that on YouTube as well?
Yeah, it's on YouTube. You have to look at the time down at the bottom right corner, the length. But it tells the story of the tragedy of the Tennessee Valley and how bad it was before the TVA. And I don't want to take up y'all's time. This is going to, I think, address, and Joe and myself, during our conversations, have a discussion about training union officers. And this goes, I don't want to drag this out, but I'm in a special situation. I moved to Alabama in '89, and this sort of tells the story of the change of politics in the state. Mm-hmm. I watched as the Democratic Party, being the so-called Democratic Party, being the party of dominance in the state, to being a minority down through time. Mm-hmm. and had the special opportunity of being an area vice president in which I guess I was a souped up shop steward, But, you're lucky in these plants and most union representatives if you got a high school education at best.
Right.
Now, how do you learn how do you learn to represent people? How do you learn to become a quasi-attorney and represent the contract and represent the employees? You know, and I'd like, and if Joe, and you can really touch on this subject with Joe, there was an organization that was attached to the University of Alabama at Birmingham called CLEAR, the acronym CLEAR, CLEAR. It was the Center for Labor Education and Research. But it slowly but surely, as the politics in Alabama changed, the funding for it went away. And it was excellent. It did union training up to and including arbitration training, steward training, the cost of the local, how the financial officers training. I mean, they did it all, and had a super safety course there too. But as politics changed, the funding went away. But the Center for Labor Education and Research would be a real good story. And oh, by the way, Adam, another thing that I want to think they put it out quarterly, but they put out a newsletter. And in every newsletter, they would do Alabama labor history. And it was, it was cool. I mean,
Well, you're hooking me up today with some stuff to research then. I said you're hooking me up today with some topics to research because that sounds really, really interesting. I definitely want to find those newsletters.
Like to back up to what I said, I came into labor as an interested member, going and attending union meetings. The folks that were there saw my interest, approached me about being a steward and then being an area vice president, and proudly served for a long time, and served with Joe Marshall, one of the finest officers that you'll ever want to sit down on an executive board with. We've gone through all those things that you touched on today, the failure to represent. We had to defend ourselves with our own union with charges that were filed. And it's too long a story to tell and take up your airtime, but no, I really do believe if you'll do the research and talk to Joe, that you'll find that there's a need. There is a dire need, because now the Center for Labor Education and Research is gone, and the local unions don't have any resources other than their internationals if they put on training, training. Oh, by the way, our region, when we were PACE, before we were steel workers, and when we were steel workers, when we merged with steel workers, PACE was our old acronym that we used before we merged with the steel workers. They reached out to the Center for Labor Education and Research when we did region trainings, when we would send stewards and officers to different locations. We'd spend the better part of a week going to classes. And, then a lot of it was taught by the professors. And oh, by the way, they were professors. They wasn't just any run-of-the-mill guy doing this thing. And they were some of the brightest individuals you would want to deal with.
Right, and there's definitely. Oh no! I mean, we don't have any other stories to talk about. So I'm happy to keep talking to you. I enjoy this kind of stuff, and I think that there is definitely a need for this kind of the training of officers in the particularities of contract enforcement and the law, and also in how to use contract enforcement to organize and build your union and build enthusiasm in your union. Because a lot of, so much is just, there's an empty seat and anybody can take it that wants to, and you're thrown to the wolves and you're thrown right into, and that's how I've come into, I'm now assistant vice president of my local, and I'm secretary treasurer of the Labor Council, and you get very little training. You get certainly not enough, and I certainly don't get a week of training with other officers who are going to be doing the same thing in other unions, the same thing that I'm doing. I mean, there is a huge dearth of this kind of stuff, and it's really just, we have to, a lot of times it seems like we've got to recreate the wheel every single new person that gets into a position.
Ideally, you get interested folks who attends meetings, and they're bright enough to be shop stewards to represent folks, but they have no clue as to what they can and cannot do.
Right.
And you have to be real careful in the law to keep your local and yourself out of trouble. I mean,
Right.
and I was fortunate enough to be around Joe, Blair McCreeless, and a number of others that were versed in labor law and educated by the union, and they were educated by guys that knew what you could and could not do and were taught. And was fortunate enough to attend the training classes at CLEAR, and we kept reams of information at our union hall, and would use them for reference, on cases, and I can remember well the stories being told to me that our local had to take a case all the way to arbitration for a lady that was not a dues paying member. Had to take it all the way, and she didn't pay dues because number one, she had a grievance that was legitimate, and once you hear the grievance, and you got to give it its due, and if it's a legitimate grievance, it's all. I mean, this thing could go all the way to arbitration. It did, and our local did take her arbitration all the way. I mean, her case all the way to arbitration. And I mean, things like that. I mean, because if you run out there on the ragged edge and you don't know what you're doing, you can get yourself, the grievant, and the local in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, you can do more harm than good if you just go out there half-cocked and not prepared.
Yeah.
And you're so right that, we're all just everyday working class folks. We're not born with a law degree, and we are not born understanding labor law and what makes a strong grievance.
And the thing that really points to the efficacy of this training is people like you and Joe, who, if you talk to people like you and Joe specifically for any amount of time, I mean, I don't believe that Joe has a college education, and I don't believe that you do either, but there's not anybody that knows the law better than Joe, certainly, and my talking to you today and before, it sounds like you've got a really good grasp on the law, at least as good as as any lawyer has about labor law. And
I know that Joe is listening right now. That he's listening. So I'm going to use an old adage that we used among ourselves. I'm going to blow his dress tail up, okay? He's got a high school education, but he is one of the most well-read individuals, and a study. He is a sponge when it comes to labor and labor law and labor issues. And he lives it and breathes it. And me and him both retired.
Right.
And I'm on the West Alabama Labor Council because I still want to be involved in labor and labor issues and the tragedy of the Warrior Met situation and the tragedy of all. If there's any issue, number of issues all over this country. And but no, I mean, and like I'll let y'all guys go and. But, I mean, do some research there, and if you find it interesting enough to do it, but do look for the long version of that TVA story, and it tells an interesting part about the atomic bomb project during World War II in one of the dams that was built.
I'll have to look that up. I saw the hour version, but I'll have to look up the 2-hour version. Is it on YouTube as well?
You need to. It might not be a complete hour. But it's a real good documentary, I just wanted to address that with Adam because he I think he's into labor and labor history. So
yes, and Joe. Well, Joe had mentioned to me the Center for Labor Education and Research in Alabama, and I think it sounds like that was kind of a national thing that Alabama adopted as well. And so I wonder what you think. How you think would be best? What do you think the options would be for replacing something like that? I mean, because it got state funding as well as union funding. It was a joint project of the state of Alabama.
If we could put something together, I'm just shooting from the hip here now. Not work out. But if we could do something from the national AFL-CIO and the state AFL-CIO in combination, and put together some kind of training program, and reach out to folks like Joe Marshall, who is educated, things like that, to be resources, on a limited basis, because these officers at these locals, at any number of locations, like I said before, you got a high school education at best, and
right.
you probably got a history class and a civics class coming out of high school,
right, which are taught by football coaches.
What's that? And what?
Which are taught by football coaches. Who,
a lot of the time, yeah.
And honest, you are correct. A lot of the times they are taught by the football coach just to have a course to teach so they can be a teacher. I hadn't thought about that, but you're correct. But I think it would be a subject if we could put it together, or if y'all can put it together, and maybe try to research a replacement for it, so these locals would have a resource to get their young officers and young stewards and their young financial officers, because that's another issue. The NLRB and all the international unions, you have to be real careful with the locals' resources and how you spend them. Things like that. I mean, that's an entire another subject. I mean, but
Well, Mel, I appreciate the call, and I appreciate your listening.
Absolutely, yeah. And I've got some homework to do now, and but yeah, I'm intrigued. I want to find out more about this CLEAR at UAB, and because I think it speaks to a need that we have now that's not really being met. And I do know there's conversations happening with labor notes about possibly doing a Southern-focused labor notes training, but I think something more permanent that could be an ongoing resource for unions across the state of Alabama to get that essential training, to get briefed on the laws, to be prepared so that they can execute their office or stewardship effectively. I think that's huge. So I appreciate you sharing this history, and looking forward to maybe tracking down some of these old newsletters and things like that. That's right up my alley.
I'm sure they're still out there. And Joe may have a few laid back as a resource. I don't know. I didn't save mine. I should have, but
right.
I saved all. Well, I'll make a point, and this is in training. Note keeping. They'll tell you to start. I mean, if you share a breath with the company and another individual and yourself, if you meet with them on an issue, you better keep notes, and they better be accurate, because at some point in the future you may have to defend yourself with those notes.
Yeah. Absolutely. That was like the number one thing I always told my members: document. You have a little notebook, a little notepad, whatever you want, however you want to do it. You better take notes anytime you're meeting with your supervisor, because they tend to get selective amnesia about that sometimes.
oh yeah, things tend to fall off the corners of desks and things like that.
Don't they?
All right, hey guys, I'm not going to take up any more of your time, and I appreciate your show and what y'all do.
Hey,
thanks, Mel.
Thanks.
Have a good one.
Yeah, man.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.